This incident is the most terrible event and a very bitter tragedy of humanity that has happened. Be with me until the bones of your body tremble. The 1976 explosion of the Enigma plant, a chemical plant near Suiso, Italy, exposed residents to high levels of tetrachlorobenzo P2,3,7,8 dioxin, Dioxin is recognized by the International Agency for Research on Cancer as a carcinogenic compound and a potent human endocrine disruptor. It is very lipophilic and has a long half-life. Since this compound is a byproduct of combustion, it is a widespread environmental pollutant in industrial areas, and exposure to it, although decreasing, is occurring everywhere. This accident joined Fukushima, Bhopal, Chernobyl and 3 Mile Island as one of the worst industrial accidents in the last century in terms of its effects on workers and residents. Suiso disaster casualties included around 3,300 livestock over several days and the slaughter of another 80,000 animals to prevent them from entering the food chain. Since no people died as an immediate result of the spill, it is more difficult to estimate total casualties. But there is no doubt that the long-term adverse health effects led to many premature deaths, particularly from respiratory and heart disease. The resulting environmental impacts led to stricter and more integrated environmental regulations and health protections across Europe. Much of what we know and can learn about the dangers of dioxin exposure to human health stems from the tragic Seveso experience. The purpose of this article is to describe how the Seveso accident happened, review the results of 40 years of research on the health of the Seveso population since the accident, and discuss the health of Seveso residents, their children and grandchildren, as well as the technical causes of the accident and the final fate of the plant. Location of Suiso City and Enigma factory. Suiso is a small suburban town about 10 miles north of Milan, Italy. Seveso had a population of about 17,000 in the 1970s and was one of several towns in the region that were a mix of urban, residential, and small agricultural areas. A nearby chemical plant was owned by Enigma, a subsidiary of pharmaceutical giant Hoffmann La Roche, and operated by Givaudan. This factory produced 2,4,5-trichlorophenol, which was used in the production of cosmetics and pharmaceuticals. What is tetrachlorobenzo P2,3,7,8 dioxin? TCDD is a type of dioxin, a family of chemical compounds that is a byproduct of industrial activities such as pulp bleaching, waste incineration, and chemical production. Dioxin is also present in trace amounts in the herbicide Agent Orange, which was used during the Vietnam War. Dioxins are called persistent organic pollutants because they take a long time to break down in the environment. As mentioned earlier, this substance is globally recognized as a carcinogenic compound and can cause reproductive, immune and developmental effects in mammals. Chloroquine, a serious skin condition consisting of lesions, can also be caused by high exposure to dioxin. Description of the incident. At approximately 12:37 on Saturday, July 10, 1976, while residents of Seveso and the surrounding area were tending to their gardens, running errands, or watching their children play, one of the chemical plant buildings became dangerously hot, causing an increase in temperature and pressure. When the temperature reached a critical point, a pressure relief valve exploded, releasing a cloud of toxic gas containing sodium hydroxide, ethylene glycol, and sodium trichlorophenate. The gas cloud that moved over the Seveso area also contained 15 to 30 kilograms of TCDD, technically known as -2,3,7,8 tetrachlorobenzo. Maintenance workers heard a whistle and a cloud of steam was seen coming out of a vent on the roof. A dense white cloud of considerable height was deflected out of the place. Among the substances in the white cloud was a small deposit of tetrachlorobenzo P2,3,7,8 dioxin, or. The release lasted about 20 minutes. In the days after the release, there was a lot of confusion due to the lack of communication between the company and the authorities when faced with this type of situation. No human deaths were attributed to TCDD, but many people became ill. 26 exposed pregnant women miscarried. Thousands of animals died in the contaminated area and thousands more were slaughtered to prevent TCDD from entering the food chain. Residents of the area experienced nausea, headache and burning eyes in the path of the aerosol cloud, and 19 children were admitted to local hospitals with skin lesions. In the following weeks, the area experienced high animal and plant casualties, and nearly 200 cases of chloroquine were reported among residents, mostly among children. Investigating the causes of the accident, defects in technical measures, operating procedures. The production cycle was terminated without any stirring or cooling, prolonging the storage of the reaction mass. Also, performing the final batch included a series of failures to comply with operating procedures. The original patented method of distillation specified that the charge was acidified prior to distillation. However, in the factory steps the order of these steps was reversed. Safety systems, venting systems, relief of overpressures, metering valves for exothermic reactions. The bursting disc was set to 3.5 bars to protect against overpressure in the compressed air used to deliver the material to the reactor. If a burst disc with a lower set pressure were installed, venting would occur at a lower and less dangerous temperature. Control systems, alarm sensors, interlocks, loss of coolant, agitator failure. Reactor control systems were inadequate both in terms of measuring equipment for a number of basic parameters and in the absence of an automatic control system. Reaction product testing, calorimetric methods, thermal stability. The company was aware of the dangerous properties of the original pyrogen. However, studies have shown that there are weaker exothermics that can lead to runaway reactions. Design codes, factory, nature of hazardous emissions. There was no means to collect or dispose of toxic materials during discharge. Secondary containment. The manufacturer of the pressure relief valve recommended the use of a second receiver for toxic recovery. That such a thing was not installed. Emergency response, spill control, safety management system, site emergency plan. Information about the released chemicals and their associated hazards was not available from the company. Communication was poor and unsuccessful both between the company and local authorities and within regulatory authorities. Within hours of the gas release from ICMESA, more than 37,000 people in the Seveso region were exposed to unprecedented levels of dioxin. However, among the first to suffer were the animals of the region. Dead animals, especially chickens and rabbits that were kept as food, began to overrun the city. Many of them were slaughtered as an emergency so that people could not eat them. By 1978, about 80,000 animals had been killed to prevent human consumption. Despite high exposure to high levels of dioxin, it took several days for people to begin to feel the initial effects. As a result of the slow onset of symptoms, officials did not immediately evacuate the area. The response to the Seveso incident was widely criticized as slow and improper by the authorities. Several days passed before officials announced that dioxin had been released from the facility. It took several more days to evacuate the affected areas. Chronic health consequences of the accident. Death rate. Bertazzi and colleagues have published several articles that have examined cancer incidence and mortality in relation to the region of residence at the time of the accident. In the first 25 years after the explosion, overall cancer mortality did not increase in any region. However, when the analysis was restricted to deaths occurring 20 years or more after the explosion, cancer deaths increased in Area A. In a recent update, the authors report that the observed increase in mortality from hematopoietic cancers in regions A and B continues, particularly among women. Cancer. Although overall cancer incidence did not increase in the first 20 years after the explosion, these researchers observed a non-significant increase in cancer incidence across a wide range of cancer sites, including breast cancer. The incidence of lymphohematopoietic cancers has increased significantly in Area B and has also increased insignificantly in Area A. At the SWHS, Warner et al. Compared TCDD serum concentrations measured in serum collected around 1976 with overall cancer incidence and breast cancer incidence 20 years after the explosion and 32 years after the explosion. A significant increase in risk for breast cancer was observed for a 10-fold increase in TCDD serum levels 20 years after the explosion and a significant dose-related increase in risk for all cancers. This relationship will be re-examined using data from 2016-2014, when most cohorts have reached menopause and breast cancer risk has peaked. Cardiovascular diseases. Cardiovascular disease after 25 years was reviewed by Consani et al. Reported increased mortality from ischemic heart disease among men living in Area A, and increased mortality from hypertension among women living in Area A. Among Area B residents, cerebrovascular disease mortality increased non-significantly in both men and women. Diabetes, body mass index and metabolic syndrome. Using mortality data from the first 25 years of follow-up, Cansani and colleagues reported excess diabetes-related mortality among women living in all high-risk areas, with a more significant increase in Area B was relative to Area A or Area R. A recent update from 1976-2013 reported an increase in diabetes-related deaths, mainly among women. Was justice established for the victims of the Seveso incident? In 1983, a court convicted 5 chemical company officials for their role in the disaster. However, after several appeals, only 2 were found guilty of criminal negligence. Roche eventually paid about $168 million in damages to cover decontamination, landfill and new housing for affected residents. However, a subsequent civil suit by the victims was unsuccessful. What happened to the factory? The ICMESA plant is now completely closed and the Seveso Forest Park was created on top of the buried facility. Under the forest park are 2 reservoirs that contain the remains of thousands of slaughtered animals, a destroyed chemical plant and the most polluted soil. The lessons that the Seveso disaster taught us. Despite the lack of justice for the victims, the Seveso disaster became a symbol of the need for stricter industrial safety regulations in Europe and around the world. In 1982, the Seveso Directive was adopted by the European Community to prevent such accidents, improve the response to industrial disasters, and implement a regulatory safety framework throughout the EC. Seveso is now subject to strict regulations that require any facility that stores, produces, or handles hazardous substances to notify local authorities and communities and to establish and disseminate incident prevention and response measures. Another important legacy of the Suiso disaster is a broader understanding of how dioxin affects human health. Scientists continue to study the survivors of Seveso, and research into the long-term health effects of the disaster continues. An environmental disaster, such as the one that occurred in Seveso, is clearly devastating for the local population, with potential ecological, economic, and long-term physical and psychological health consequences. Unfortunately, a number of environmental disasters, both man-made and natural, have occurred in the wake of the Seveso incident, and more will undoubtedly occur in the future. The incident in Seveso is an important example of the steps that epidemiologists and allied health professionals can take in the aftermath of a disaster to document its health effects. Epidemiological research in Seveso was only possible because of the rapid establishment of a long-term health surveillance program of the population, which involved the collection and storage of biological samples from large numbers of affected individuals. Despite the fact that methods for analyzing exposure in those samples had not yet been developed. It is a strong reminder and legacy of the health effects caused by industrial toxins and the importance of safety regulations and strong enforcement of these laws.